Welcome friends to today's React Firebase CRUD tutorial where we're going to be looking at how we can implement create, read, update, and delete with Firebase as our persistence database in our React application. So without further ado, let's get into it and see how it's done. So for this tutorial, I took the liberty of putting together a little React application. It's super simple, basic CRUD application, where we can add friends, make them a friend, change them to an enemy, or delete a friend if we don't want a friend. So the code is just here. The link to the GitHub repository with all the code is in the description, so check that out if you just want to copy it in. It's pretty simple. And currently we're just using state for this application, and we can see if I type in a friend, James, add them, they show up here, and then if we change this to Alfred, we can add them, and then let's say we have Lucy, we can add them. So it's super simple. You could make it infinitely better. But essentially how it works is we can just delete a friend, we can add them back, and if we want, we can change them to bad. We could have Heinrich, add them, change them to bad, maybe he's good again. And so it's just a pretty simple create, read, update, and delete application. Now the problem with this application is that as soon as I refresh my page, all of the information is gone. And this is where an application like Firebase, a database, a NoSQL database, can be amazing for persisting that application. Fortunately, adding Firebase to our application is super simple, and all we have to do is come into our app, and in our root directory, we're just going to type npm i Firebase. Now that that's installed, if we come into our home directory, we're going to make a new file called firebase.javascript. And in here, we're going to type import initialize app from firebase/app. Now these instructions are also linked in the description below to the Firebase documentation, but it's super simple. Here we're just going to say const firebase config, just like that, and that is equal to an object that we'll fill out in a minute. And then lastly, we're just going to say const app is equal to initialize app, call that function, and pass in our Firebase config. Now that will initialize Firebase, however, we're going to need specifically the Firestore for this project, and so in here we're just going to say import get Firestore from /firebase/firestore. So just like that, easy peasy. And now down here at the very bottom, we can just write export const database is equal to get Firestore, and we just pass in our app, which will soon have our configuration. So this is essentially our config file, and we export this so we can import it into any other file that we need. So now that that is all done, the next thing we're going to do is come into the Firebase console, and you're going to want to log into your account. And once you're logged in, we can add a project, and for this, I'm just going to call it CRUD React Firebase. We click continue. We don't need any of the analytics, and we can create that project. Now that our project is ready, we can click continue, and it's going to take us to this home page where we can do authentication, app check, Firestore, real-time database, a whole lot of things, serverless functions, heaps of stuff. But in our particular case, we're just going to start off by clicking on this web button just here, type in a name for our app, CRUD React Firebase. We're going to register the app. And now it's going to tell us to do npm install Firebase, which we've already done. And then here is literally what we've been doing, and we're just going to set up this configuration for our file. Now this is private information and you don't want to share it. Don't stress, I've deleted this before you get your hands on it, so it's all good. In our particular case, we're just going to copy it, and we can copy it directly into our Firebase config file, just like that. Now if you really wanted to, you could make a .env file. And with this .env file, if we just check, it should be ignored in here. It's not, so we might just change this to .env.local, because that is ignored. And now we can just write react app underscore and save all of these configuration files into that .env file. So if we just do that quickly, so this would be, for example, React App API key is equal to, and we copy that down a few times. And so this second one is going to be auth domain. Then we have project ID. After that, there's storage bucket. Then we have messaging sender ID. And lastly, we have the app ID, just like that. And the reason that you do this is because this file will stay private from outside users. And if you do have a public repository, it will keep everything hidden so that it's just for you. And we can see how we can read that in just a second. So now we copy all these keys across, just like that. Save our document. That's the last one, just like this. Cool. And now what we can do is we can read them in by, instead of having this, we can instead write process.env dot whatever our key name was, this just like that. And we can do that for all of them. So if I just copy this and replace that, this one here, this one here, and this one here. And then we can just swap out those final key names for whatever it might be. And so this will read this information in from our .env file, and suddenly our keys are all secure so that only we can access it and no one will go billing to our project. So now that we've set all of that up and that is all well and good, we can come back into our database and continue through to our console. And in here, we can click on Cloud Firestore, or you could access it from over here, Firestore Database. And we can click on this Create Database button, and you can do it in production or test mode. And we can just enable that just like that. So that's going to provision us a Cloud Firestore database and just ensure that this database functionality will work correctly for these given keys. So now that that's all done, we've been redirected to our little database, and in here we're going to start a collection, and this one is going to be called people because our app essentially manages people. We'll click next. In here we'll say associates is going to be the document, and the document is going to be full of key value pairs where the key is a person's name and the value is their status. And so in this particular case, we could put in some basic ones where if we come back a second, so let me just remove that. Yeah, we can just click save like that. So now that's going to initialize a people and associates document, and typically what you could do is you could have a users document and then like a friends or an enemies, but in this particular case I'm just going to keep it all merged in one. So now that we have our document all set up, we can come back into our application and start writing to it. And so to make that super simple, how I've configured our app is we have these three CRUD functions right here. The first one handles ads, and so that's when we click this add button. The second one handles change, and so that's when, for example, if I have a friend, James, when we click bad, it handles that change functionality and changes their status to bad. And finally, we have the delete button, which just removes them altogether. And so the first one we're going to look at is the add functionality, and to do that, we're going to have to start off by first coming up to the top of our file and importing. We're going to have to start off by first coming up to the top of our file and importing our database from /Firebase, just like that. Now that we have that, we can import two functions. The first one is going to be doc, and the second one is setDoc. And so this is the set functionality, or the, I guess, create or update functionality for Firebase, and so we're going to import that from Firebase/Firestore. And now we're good to come into our app, and here, when we create a friend, what we're going to do is first turn this into an asynchronous function, because all of these calls are asynchronous. And then the second thing we're going to do is, instead of just updating our state, we're also going to persist it to our database at the same time by saying first const user reference, or in this case we could do people reference, is equal to, and we call the doc function, we pass the database, we pass the table, sorry, the collection, and then we pass the associates, so the particular document, just like that. And so here we can see that the document is associates. And now that we have that reference, we're good to come and update this document by saying await set doc. So this is the set doc function that we imported above. And in here we pass in the people reference that we just defined. And as a second argument, we can now update some information. And so in this particular case, all we're going to do is update our new user, which is here, and our friend name is status. So it's virtually the same thing. Instead of setting our people and adding that, we're just adding that object to our database. And so now if I save that and restart our application, we come back into our app, we can refresh the page. I get an error because the Firebase was outside of the source, so we'll just drag that in there and update our imports. And now we're getting this issue because I'm a Muppet, and that is a lowercase s. And so we just want to call that just like that. And now when I refresh the page, everything compiles beautifully. Now, if we just type in a friend here, let's say James, and click add, we can see that they're added here. However, now if we find that again, nothing is happening because we just want to quickly remove this. Publish our new changes. So that's just going to be publicly available. And so now that I've changed those security rules, when we come back into my React app, if I refresh this page and type in James, and I click add, James is added here, and now we can see that opening up that security allows anyone to add, and our information is persistent in our database. Now that is super useful. What if we add another person? Let's say we add Henry. Now Henry has been added, however, it has completely overwritten the status of associates. And that's because in here, what we probably want to do is, instead of persisting our information like this, instead what we would write is we would pass the friend name here, and then as a key, we would pass the status as friend. So now we can come in here and delete these two entries. And so now when we add Henry again, Henry gets added and the status is friend. So that's super cool. What if we now come in and add James? So we've added James to the top here. Now we can see that James has been added to our database. However, it has overwritten the previous entry and has completely reset this associates document. And to stop that from happening, we can come in here and just say merge is true. And Firebase will automatically now merge all of our new entries. So let's say we add Lucy. Lucy now gets merged in with James. So that is just super handy dandy to know. You can either completely overwrite your whole document, or you can adapt it and amend to it. So now that we've finished that step, what if we want to update a particular entry? Well, that's actually relatively easy. All we have to do is copy this exact same logic into our next function, which is this one just here. So if I just bring this down onto a new line. So currently what happens, let me just console that up for a second. When I click bad, they get switched into the bad list. And so we want this logic to be replicated into our database, and we can do that by first, once again, making this an asynchronous function. And now what we can do is we can set the new status that we want to change it to. So in here, currently it's going to set it to the enemy status, but we actually want to set it to the opposite. And so if they're in the enemies list, we can actually just set it to friend. And if they're in the friends list, we can just set it to enemy. I can spell it right. And so what that means is that in our handle change document, we can just read in that current status. And so now if I refresh our database and just type in James, who already exists in our database as a friend, we can add them here. Since it's the same key, it will still overwrite that. However, now when I click bad, we can see that James has been changed to bad indeed. However, since I changed that bottom thing, I forgot to change some logic here, so that will just become the current status. Well, just like that. Excellent. And so that works super nicely, and so we can test that again. Bad now gets changed to good here, and there's still an enemy. And we could do that again, and so now if we switch them back over, we can see that James is now a friend again. And so that's an example of how we can update that information. Now it's important to once again have that merge true, otherwise we would lose Lucy. But now we can come and look at the last method, which is delete, and we're going to start off by making that an asynchronous call. Once again, we'll just use the exact same logic as we had before, and so we can just paste that in just there. However, now we have a new entry, and instead of using what we've previously used, we're just going to import delete doc. And down here where we normally set the doc, we're going to instead update the doc, which will also have to be imported, so that is automatically imported up there. We still pass in the people ref. We can remove this merge is true. However, now we have the friend name, and we can just use that method that we imported, which is delete field. So that's just up there. And that was the wrong one. And so now when I come back into our application, we have James here. If I click delete and come into our Firebase, we literally just saw them getting kicked out. So that's all excellent. What is the very last step? Well, I still lose all of my information when I refresh my page. So what am I going to do about that? Well, the answer is I'm going to use a use effect that runs on page load and set that information. So here we can just go use effect and pass the callback function just like that. And in our dependency array, we can have nothing so that it runs on page load. Now in here we can define an asynchronous function called fetch people, asynchronous function, sorry. And now with that function, we can fetch all of this information using the getDoc method. And so in here, what we have to do is we write, once again, const doc reference is equal to doc. We pass the database, we pass people, and we pass associates for the particular document. So the people is the collection. And then on a second line, we write const doc snap is equal to await get doc, and we pass in the doc reference just like that. So in here we can write if doc snap dot exists. Dot exists is a method to check if everything works, and if doc snap exists, we can console.log doc snap dot data, and so dot data is a method to get the data. And so now if we come in here and refresh this page, we currently get absolutely nothing, and that's because we actually have to call the method. So we call the method in the use effect, and now we can see that we get our friend Lucy. And so in here we could just set people equal to docsnap.data if it exists, just like that. But that actually needs to be inside an array because we filter through it in my particular logic. And so now if we refresh that page, Lucy shows up twice. However, currently it doesn't display due to the logic down below, but if we just quickly add another person here, James, and add, so now James is added there and James is in our database, and when we refresh our page, we can see that we get both James and Lucy back. And so in here what we could do is if we really wanted to display that logic, we could just say object.keys, and in this case go docsnap.data, and we can map over it, and all we have to do is take the key, return an object where the name is the key and the status is equal to docsnap dot data and take the entry at that key. Now in this particular case, status is not working, and that is because I have to make sure that this returns as an object itself. And so if I just wrap that in a parentheses just like that, magic, and so now we can see once again Lucy and everything gets rendered on the page. The last thing you could do is put this inside of a try catch block with a loading state, and so for that you would just go try catch any errors, and in here you could just console.log the error and have a finally block afterwards where if you had a loading state you could just say set loading false, and then we can just paste all of this information here inside of this try catch block. And so now you're going to have a really robust Firebase application that will do everything you could possibly want and imagine. Super cheap, it's totally free up until an insane number of reads and writes and deletes, so it's just a great thing to know how to implement. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, super helps the channel. Leave some comments, let me know what you want me to do next or any feedback that you may have, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.